Okay, so it seems like this platform worked well for you, so we're gonna try it again. Okay, so this week is assessments. We're gonna talk a little bit about assessments, and we're gonna review actual 4 cases that have actually been 4 of my cases, since I specialize in children. They will all be children. The information will be obscured, so you will not be able to figure out who it is, and won't even know what state I worked with the clients in. It's very important whenever you do review a case, unless you're reviewing it in a very specific confines with peers that are assisting you in your treatment, that you do obscure information such that they cannot be identified. And that's more than just their name, that's other information that could be unique and could give them away. So we're going to review 4 cases, but before that, we're going to talk a little bit about what assessments are and what they aren't, and things to keep in mind when you're doing them. There are also multiple assessments that I have given you a link to through Blackboard, and so access those, look those over. A couple of them you can even do on yourself. I've been told in the past that it's more helpful to look at a few assessments and then talk about them in general and then see them applied to specific cases rather than going in detail into 20 different assessments, because there are literally hundreds of different assessments that you could do. So we're going to talk about the big picture assessments, like what assessments should do in general, and then there's going to be the individual assessments for you guys to look at just to get a sampling of some common assessments that are out there. Okay, so let's jump on in. Okay, so what's the purpose of assessment? A lot of people don't like assessments because they feel like it's just a time to stereotype a client, but really it's so much more than that, and a good assessment is crucial. A good assessment will help you form a valid picture of the current state of a client. So this would mean their strengths, their weaknesses, things that are going on in their life right now. This is really important to understand. This will guide a lot of treatment. This will also help you know if you're the right place for them to receive treatment, what other people should be involved in their treatment. This will give you a lot of very important information. It also helps you form a valid picture of interventions needed in the timeline. So for instance, if there's an intervention that's needed and it's needed right away, that's going to be something that you need to act upon right away. If it's going to be an intervention that they maybe will be executed in 6 months, that's going to change your treatment. If there's going to be multiple interventions that need to take place simultaneously, that's going to, again, affect how you're going to work with things. And of course, keeping in mind that working with children, these things all have to be coordinated not only with the client, not only with the department, the clinical department, the clinician, whatever the agency components are, but also the parents and the parents' lives as well. It'll help you, a good assessment will also help you form a valid picture of the client's constellation. So the client's constellation is their family, their supports, their hobbies, their interests, their passions, special skills, maybe phobias or things they don't like. To give you the whole picture of what's going on with the client. And ultimately, what we're after in an assessment is a linear way to explore, describe, and evaluate client and needs. So when you read a good assessment, this is what they'll do. They will lay out for you in a linear way what is going on with the client and the client's needs, and they will explore them. So they'll give you detail on them, then they'll describe them, right, and let you know what that looks like for the specific client, and then they'll evaluate what's going on with the client, and then they'll also talk about usually projections into the future. Depending on the background, the theoretical orientation is what we call it, of the clinician performing the assessment, they may include a lot of information about the client's past. They may not include a lot of information about the client's past. It's really going to depend on how they see things. If they're a behavioral therapist, there's probably not going to be very much about the past. If they're Freudian or so psychodynamic, they're probably going to include a lot of information about the past. Okay, so things that an assessment is or should not be. So things that an assessment should not be or is not. It's not the final word on the client. An assessment should be a very well done, usually a lot of detail when you're looking at a final assessment report. An assessment should should give you very good information, right? We talked about it should explore, it should expand upon things, but it's not the final word on the client. It's always important to know that things that might need to be changed, things that might need to be updated. Maybe they'll need to take another assessment to add to the report to understand something in greater depth. An assessment report should also not be solely negative. If everything in the assessment report is just things that they have done incorrectly or problems that they're having in life, that tells you right there there's a big problem with that assessment report. Because even people that have made really bad choices and are really bad parts in their life, they usually have, or I shouldn't say usually, they all have something that is good. They have some skill or some strength or something. And so if an assessment report is just a list of bad stuff, that tells you that it probably was not completed by an expert. Assessment should not become a self-fulfilling prophecy. An assessment should be assessment reports, and assessments individually too, but assessment reports should be something that is well-founded upon actual researched assessments that have individually been done and then compiled, including the clinician's expert opinion and observations. One of the reasons that we often discourage clients from reading their own assessments is because sometimes when clients read them, they will turn them into self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas hopefully an educated and competent clinician will look at the assessment report and see it as a stepping stone, see it as a place to start and a map for where they might go and what they might do in the future, a guide for those things. They'll also recognize that things might need to be tweaked, new information will come in, things will need to be changed or altered. And sometimes if a client sees the assessment report, what they will do is then just take this all as gospel truth. It'll absolutely become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Even things that aren't true, they'll start to see in different ways in their life, and so they'll start to kind of make them true. That certainly doesn't mean that clients can't see their assessment reports. They do have a legal right in almost every case to see them. It's just usually discouraged. And in my experience, most people aren't interested in them. An assessment should never be completed by unqualified personnel. So there's different levels of qualification for different assessments, different individual assessments. So for instance, excuse me, like a Stanford Binet intelligence test, what we commonly think of as IQ. That's usually, you usually need your doctorate degree in order to complete that. There are instances where a master's degree would be sufficient. And you have to have actual explicit training in the test itself, because how you deliver the test is very specific. How you say things, how you ask a question, how you present the materials in front of a client. All of that is very precise and very specific and part of how everything is evaluated and scored. So it's very important that the individual assessments be completed or administered as they should be, as they ultimately should. So there's something called an Achenbach that's commonly used, and there's different types of Achenbach. There's some for directly for the child or client, and there's some for teacher report, some for parent report. And so those are meant to be surveys and reports that are filled out by non-clinical personnel who have experience with the client. And that's how they're supposed to be filled out. There are other assessments, however, that the way in which they're supposed to be filled out is very precise. The way in which they're supposed to be administered is very precise, and they do require a good deal of training before they are done. The results could be drastically different if it's administered by somebody who's untrained versus trained. An assessment should absolutely not be random opinions and observations. Every once in a while I read a rambling assessment that's just somebody just saying what they think about everything and about the client and everything, and that's a very poorly done assessment report. Assessment reports should really be several different forms of assessment, so usually to be a couple of written assessments, a couple of observational assessments. It'll be several different guided and precise assessments that they've done, and then they've compiled them into the report to again create that constellation of the client and the client's needs at the moment. Okay, a couple things to remember about assessments and assessment reports is you do need to evaluate your assumptions. So something that I say that is pretty controversial, but those of you who have had counseling classes with me are used to me saying this, is, well, a lot of people tell you don't have assumptions. And I'm going to tell you, I think that effort is a waste of time. It is impossible not to have assumptions. Because a lot of times our assumptions keep us alive, save us mental energy, help us get through our lives. So, for instance, I'm going to guess that a lot of you don't know for a fact where your car is right now. Maybe some of you are sitting in your car. Maybe some of you are looking at your car right now. But there's also some of you who you know where your car is. You know where you parked it last, but you're not positive it's still there. It could have been stolen. It could have gotten hit by a meteor. Something could have happened. But you're assuming that you know where it is. And that certainly makes sense. That's a valid assumption until you have reason to suspect otherwise. Or I'm sure a lot of you assume that your friends are not talking about you behind your back. You're not constantly spending energy in order to figure out and confirm that assumption. You're just taking it for granted. Now, some of you, that may not be the case. You may have reason to suspect that your clients are not doing that, or maybe you're just a mistrustful person, or maybe your trust has been violated in the past. But there are a lot of things that we do that we run off of assumptions. Now, assumptions can be based in fact. You can have a logical reason to assume something is the case. So assumptions are really very helpful things. Assumptions can be very, very, very helpful, and they are necessary. You cannot even spend an hour of your life not making an assumption. So to say don't make any assumptions, I think is ludicrous. It is impossible. It is impossible, and it is a waste of energy. So what you need to instead do is spend your energy on being aware of your assumptions. So spend your energy becoming aware of what your assumptions are. This is especially crucial for assessment reports because you will make a lot of assumptions, and it's very important that you become aware of what they are so that you can then investigate further. Also, you'll miss things. Whether you're doing an individual assessment or you're doing a assessment report, the chance that you'll miss something is very high. One of the things that comes with experience is learning what is most likely to be important and what is most likely to not be important. Experience will build upon this. There is so much information that you will get from a client through observational assessment, through individual form assessment, that there's no way that in an assessment report you could write up every single thing that you learn. It is impossible. Unless you're going to write a 2,000-page assessment, and then what would be the point of writing it up because no one would be able to read it, right? So you'll have to, by the sheer nature of what an assessment report is meant to do, is focus on things that are deemed more important and not things that are deemed less important. Part of what will come with experience is knowing what to pay attention to and knowing what it probably can be left out of the report. You will make mistakes. You will forget stuff. You will forget to put stuff in there that is important, and you will include stuff that's irrelevant. But with experience, your reports will become better and better and better. A story that I heard many, many years ago. There was a problem at a power plant, and they couldn't figure out what was going wrong, and they called in a man to fix it. And he walked in, he spent just a few minutes tinkering with some things, looking at everything, and then he went back to his car and got one washer and fiddled with something and put the little washer in there and then fixed it and put it back. And a few weeks later, they got his bill. And his bill was $20,000. And they called him up and they said, whoa, $20,000? That washer cost $20,000? I mean, that's just a little round ring of metal. That cost $20,000? And he goes, oh, no, that round ring of metal, I gave you guys that for free. The thing that cost $20,000 was my experience. Because being able to walk into a power plant and in a few minutes know exactly what you need to do in order to avoid catastrophe is experience, and that's expertise. And so that's what's paid for. And so, again, as you have expertise and experience, you will make reports that are better and more helpful. And one of the big reasons that'll be true is because you're more aware of what should be focused on and what can be left out. One of the things that people like to think early on is that they shouldn't leave anything out. But again, that's not a report you can write. That's not realistic that every single possible piece of data is written down. That report would be so long it could not be read by anybody. So it would essentially be useless. So you do need to develop the skill of what do you include, what do you exclude. It is also important that there is both objective and subjective information in the assessment. Now, certainly a good chunk of the assessment, I would say the majority of the assessment should be objective. This should be factual, doesn't change based on who's seeing it, data. But there will be some subjective data. Now, again, the subjective data will become more and more relevant and meaningful the more and more experience you get. The subjective data of somebody who's been on the job for 1 day will not be as valuable, as generally speaking, as a subjective data of somebody who's been on the job for 10 years. Now, keep in mind, another thing I've often heard is be careful when people say they have 10 years experience. Some people have 10 years experience. Some people have 1 year experience 10 times. Meaning, not everybody learns from their experience. Some people just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they say, oh, I've been doing this for 15 years, I got all this experience, but they haven't been learning as they've been going along. So no, they don't really have 15 years of knowledge behind them. They just have 1 day of knowledge, repeated tens of thousands of times, or 1 year of experience repeated 15 years. So just because somebody has been doing something for X number of years does not mean that they have actually been learning for all that time. One of the biggest indications of whether or not people are continuing to learn is how often they realize that they're wrong. Now, when I say wrong, I don't mean, oh, I was wrong to trust Bob on this plan because Bob let me down. No, that's not really you admitting you're wrong. That's basically you just blaming Bob for something. But I mean the wrong of somebody actually saying, I did this, I made this choice, it was a bad choice. I said this, it was a wrong thing to say. I did this, it was incorrect. Those are things, recognizing that the fault lies with them individually, not they're blaming somebody else and they should have trusted that person. Oh yeah, they should have just done it themselves. Things that just make them seem better, like other people. Anything that basically is, you're admitting that you're wrong because you're better than somebody else, and that's how you're admitting that you're wrong because you didn't think that. That's not admitting you're wrong, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the really recognizing an error was made. You made the error. How can you rectify it in the future so as not to make the same error? People who do this are far more likely to be people who actually build on their experience. Okay, so we're going to jump into the first case. Okay, so it was a 10-year-old boy. He was adopted at age 3. It was an international adoption. He had some physical ramifications from the orphanage, not being able to walk and malnourishment. It kind of affected some of his abilities to walk and run and other things. He really played a lot. When I worked with him, he was 10, and he played a lot. He was very much in the world of play, Legos, sand tray, things like that he just loved. And he played differently than the boys, than was typical of boys his age. He was very into it. You could tell that it was high stakes play. You could tell that it's very meaningful what he was doing. He was acting out things a lot. His behaviors, in general, and one of the reasons he comes to see me is that he was very impulsive, he was defiant, he was very reactive, and he had physical behavior problems. So again, doing things that could be physically problematic. So for instance, one of them was crawling on top of the roof when he didn't like being told no. So he crawled on top of a roof and put himself in a very, very, very dangerous situation. He had a consistent theme in play that was a strong woman rescuer in chaotic war scenes. So he would often make, especially in the stand tray, he would often make stand trays where there would be, for instance, dinosaurs all fighting each other in this chaotic kind of scene. And then there would be like the fairy princess that he would set down in the middle and give her a wand, and she would make everything okay, and she would restore the dinosaurs to peace. There was a consistent theme of things like that, a strong woman coming in and rescuing the chaos. His adopted mother is unmarried, and she herself was a very strong individual. So these are just some random facts, or they're important facts. I shouldn't say just random. These are some important facts about this case. But one of the things I want you to realize as we're going to walk through this is just I've left out obviously a whole bunch of information, right? There are 7 bullet points of information up here. I worked with this child for about 1.5 years. I have far, far, far more information than what I have here. Now, obviously some of it is left out for the sake of confidentiality, but a good deal of it is also left out because I've tried to focus on the things that are most important. So what I want to do with just this little sketch of this client that I've given you guys is walk through the very basics, the very introductory way to approach an assessment report. Okay. So, again, what factual things do we know? Okay, so some factual things we know are his age, his gender, who his caretaker is right now. Some other factual things we know are where he came from, how long he was there, and some of his physical condition and some of his current behaviors. We also, a factual thing is the amount of time that he likes to spend in play. Some things that are likely true, some things that are maybe assumptions as well. My subjective opinion that his play is different than other children, other boys his age, that he's more engaged in it. Those aren't things that have been quantified. There hasn't been a specific test. I haven't been timing every client I've worked with, and I can say, oh, this one worked with this for 30 seconds. Oh, this boy is working with this for 5 minutes. So it's not something that I have objective information, but it is an expert opinion formed with a great deal of experience. So that is likely true, that it is different how he's behaving. It's also not known for a fact that he is seeing his adoptive mother as the strong, heroic woman in play that comes and saves everybody. But that seems likely to be true, given different themes that are going on, given my different experience, and understanding how he's relating to his mother and different characters that he's describing and interacting with in play. Those are some things that are likely true. It's also likely true that being 10 and having physical difficulties is starting to affect him. He's starting to notice it a little bit more than he has in the past. When he was younger, it didn't matter as much. He's starting to get to the age where it's starting to matter as much. Again, I don't objectively know that from the information that was presented. We don't objectively know that, right? But those are things that are likely true. So there's a difference between objective and subjective, and it's a very important difference. But don't ever think that subjective is meaningless. It's just always important that you know what is subjective and you know what is objective. Okay, so what are some things that we need to learn about? Given that just that little snapshot that you got, what are some things that we need to learn more about? Okay, well, some things that I would want to learn more about is I would want to learn more about the female hero figure. Okay, so I want to learn, where is that coming from? Is he putting that on his adoptive mother? Is that how he is seeing his adoptive mother? Is that who he's wanting his adoptive mother to be? Who does he see himself as a sand tray? Is he one of the people that's being saved? Is he just an outside observer to this war? There's some things that I want to know. Something else I would also want to know is what needs are getting met by his behavior that puts him in danger physically. So climbing on the roof and doing other things that put him in great physical harm, what needs are being met with that? One of the reasons I'd like to know that is because that'll help us determine things that'll help him be more safe in the future. Still get those needs met, but help him be more safe. Again, those are just an example of what we need to learn more about. There's a lot more. Those are just some examples. Does anything need to happen immediately? Well, with this client, yes. Something needs to happen immediately. We know, for example, that he went on the roof when he was very frustrated one day, when he was reactive. So that is something that could very easily have led to loss of life, serious injury or loss of life. So something does need to happen immediately because some of the behaviors that he's choosing are indeed life-threatening. So what does that mean? What could be different? He could go to a wilderness camp where there are not buildings to climb on because they're camping every day. He could need to see a psychiatrist, and they could utilize sedatives. I wouldn't recommend that at all. I am just saying some different paths that people go down. He could go to a facility that's more, slightly locked down, not full lockdown, but has some more lockdown elements to keep eyes on him all the time so that he can be safer. Right? There's different things that could be done, but yes, something does need to be done immediately because we know that there is a clear and present threat to his life. Does anyone else need to be involved in the assessment at this point? And I would say absolutely. His adoptive mother needs to be involved in this assessment. Now, how she is involved in the assessment is up to the assessment writer. Is she involved? Does she come in and talk to the boy? Is she herself interviewed separately? Does she herself take assessments upon herself, about her son? how she's utilized is different. But since she is the adult that he's by far closest to, and especially since there seem to be themes in play that are mirroring his relationship with her, absolutely, I would involve her in assessment. And then, was there anything especially odd or unique about the client that you saw? That's also usually a good starting point of something to explore, and at the very least something to note in the assessment reports. So, was there anything especially unique or odd? So, again, about this client, one of the unique things about him was the amount of play and the vividness of his play. So, those would be things that really stand out as the unique aspects of this client. So again, those would be something that I would want to utilize more, explore more, and then that might also tell me something about treatment. Maybe I'll really utilize that for treatment, really tap into his play, really get him to explore things through play, since that's such a vivid modality for him. Okay, so we're going to review some more cases, and we're just going to go over them really quickly, but I'm really wanting you to apply some of these assessment principles to them. I'm going to go through them pretty briefly, but I would like you guys, after we review them, to then stop it and say, okay, now what would you do given this information? Keep in mind that I'm giving you just a tiny bit of information, so you're going to have to make some assumptions, but you're going to be aware of them, and then you're going to know what to test, you're going to know what to explore. So just kind of put on that assessment hat for a little bit, and let's explore. Okay, so case 2. The male is 15 years old. He had an intact biological family, and he had 2 siblings, so it was a family of 5. His behaviors were resistance to everyday activities, severe social phobia, destruction of property, rage, and very inappropriate social behaviors, such as running around naked when he was very upset. He was in a residential treatment program. He was 2 years in the program, and the program on average was 18 months. So he was already there for 6 months longer than average, and he was not making much progress in the program. EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, was utilized to target a phobia that he had of masked creatures, that he had of social groups, and that he had of sports. These things were really holding him back from being able to do most of the things that he wanted to do. Family therapy was also utilized on a weekly basis. He finished the program 6 months after treatment began, so it took him 2.5 years to complete the program, which was a year longer than average. But he went from being stuck and being 6 months behind to 6 months later completing the program. When he graduated the program, he credited EMDR as being the treatment that helped him. Okay, so as you can see, this is a picture of what would most likely be an end report, right? You're writing an end of treatment assessment. So it's going to be slightly different. One of the reasons I've included this is because assessments are not only written at the beginning of treatment. Assessments are also written at different points in treatment, but also at the conclusion of treatment. Because the chances that the clients will need treatment later on is pretty high. Most people, especially depending on different levels of treatment, will need treatment afterwards. So a concluding assessment report is very important. Writing a good one is very important. You want to include the initial assessment usually with that. You'll include changes. You'll include any other assessments that have been done in the meantime. Treatments that were effective, and then what was explored, what was worked on, what was effective, what wasn't effective. You'll include all that so that if it then comes to be that it's needed later on and the treatments get reviewed, it helps the people that are starting the treatment later on kind of start with a leg up instead of having to start back from ground zero. So again, as we're looking at this case for this boy and the assessment that we would write up, we would know that an intact biological family was most likely a strength of his. Of course, I have the benefit here of knowing a lot about him, and it was a great strength of his. I would also mention how family therapy, tapping into the strength of his biological family in family therapy, was an important piece of his treatment, not just working independently. EMDR is a treatment that does not involve the client to talk very much if they don't want to. That was a very effective part of his treatment, so I would mention that nonverbal modalities were very effective for him. His behaviors, as you can see, not only were the running naked through things when he was through crowds when he was frustrated, but also his rage and destruction of property. Those are things that are going to land you in trouble very quickly when you are an adult. So the behaviors were pretty high level. They were things that need to be monitored, things that need to be addressed right away. He also had the awareness to credit EMDR with his treatment that helped him. So that might also indicate in the future, if something comes up, that he's inclined to accept EMDR. That might be a treatment that he's more willing to start with than others because he himself credits that as being effective. So case 3 is a 7-year-old male. Reported to his teacher some concerning things about home life, and then that led to all 4 of his siblings and himself being removed from the home. They were all placed in separate foster homes from siblings. So you can imagine that for this 7-year-old, these things all mean that when he said something, his life then drastically changed for every family member, and all changed for the worse. I know it changed for the worse because I know what it was that had been reported. But for him, an assumption that could be made early on that could be then tested is, how safe is he with words? How safe is he with talking? Because when the last time he talked to an authority figure, it led to some pretty severe damage. So words and talking to authority figures might not be a super safe thing for him. So asking him to do that may not even be a super safe thing. So that's an assumption that you could start with based on the information that you have. And you want to test that assumption. And I will say for this client, that was absolutely the case. Words were not the way to connect with this boy initially. He demonstrated many problems after he was removed from his home. He demonstrated a lot of bathroom problems, peeing places he shouldn't have, doing things, a lot of acting out behaviors, primarily based in his powerlessness. He was placed in psychiatric care. He was placed on psychotropic medications. His caseworker was changed every 3 months. The only stable relationship in a year was with his therapist. So in a year of his life, he went from living with his biological mom and dad and intact family of 7 to everybody living separately except for the mom and dad. And even his caseworker, who was his main contact person from OCS, was changing every 3 months. And the most stable person in his life at that point was a therapist that he saw a few times a week. So, world turned upside down for this boy. So, for this one, this would be a mid-treatment, or report. And so again, what we would be looking at is okay, what are some things that were initially assessed regarding verbal safety and things like that? Where had he been? What progress had he made? What progress had he made in psychiatric care? What progress had he made with his psychotropic medications? Could any stability be given to the OCS worker? Could something be done to address that? Only stable relationship in a year was therapist. Okay, how is that relationship progressing? And then what's the projection from here on out? Because again, this isn't a beginning of treatment report. This isn't an end of treatment report. This would be a middle of treatment assessment report. And then the last one we're going to look at, this is another end of treatment assessment report. 11-year-old female, neglected and abandoned by her mother at age 8. She was malnourished. She was ignored for a long period of time before her mother finally just left. During this time period when the mother wasn't paying attention, the brother, who was 12 at the time, attempted suicide. She had reported intrusive thoughts and unwanted associations with things, always thinking up and remembering certain things, and when she heard certain words, it would trigger certain memories. She really was able to identify that these are the things she wanted to address. She also was treated with using EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Treatment lasted for only 5 months. When she came in, it had been projected that treatment would need to last a year. So treatment lasted for less than half of the time that was originally projected to last. And then client had achieved goals and kept gains by 6 months after every week of treatment. So meaning she was continually building and keeping the gains that she had after 6 months. So it shows high level of effectiveness. So this would be an example of, when we compare it to the initial case, initial assessment that said, client will probably need to be in treatment for a year, of different things. This would be an example of writing that conclusion, end of treatment assessment, and say, the prognosis was originally 1 year of treatment. Client met all treatment goals in 5 months, and gains were kept. Evaluating 6 months out. Treatment that was effective for her was EMDR. So it would be an end of case assessment or end of treatment assessment, and what it does, it says, that initial assessment report that said this, these are the things that were wrong. These are the things that were actually effective. This is how we can actually do things. Okay, so I am hoping that talking about assessments and what they are and how we do them, looking at those for case reports, and then also spend the time to go through those other assessments that are on Blackboard. And I'm hoping what that'll do is give you a big picture view of assessments and what they do and what they don't do. It's really impossible for us to go through every single assessment. There are, like I said, there are literally hundreds of assessments. So there's just no way for us to review every assessment. And I don't think that that's needed either. Assessments are constantly changing. I could show you 50 different assessments and you might not wind up using any of them in your work. Assessments are constantly changing. But what doesn't change is the reason we utilize assessments, what we need to pay attention to when we're writing assessment reports. And then also when we look at information, we can get a lot, even from a little bit of information about our clients, if we know what to look for and if we're willing to admit we're wrong.